Okay, we're on. Hi, everybody. I'm well aware I've not uploaded in a very, very long time. I'm scattered. It is what it is. And I feel like I say this every time I come back. I'm going to try to upload more. I genuinely gonna try to upload more, right? Now, I've realized something, though. We'll get into the topic of the video shortly. But, like, I've realized something. I just don't fucking like editing. And maybe as I get the ball rolling more, as I continue to upload more, taking the idea of editing off of my plate and focusing more on sort of this free form, very conversational style of video making will help me be more consistent so that maybe in the future I will actually have the motivation to actually edit things and while keeping the consistency. So right now I'm just focused on consistency. As you can see, my room's a mess. So, like, I'm just scrambled. This room is a physical manifestation of my inner mind. But something just occurred to me, and I just wanted to talk about it, and I'm feeling productive. I had a healthy dose of caffeine today. And I'm just like, you know what? Let's talk about something. I need to stim, and YouTube shall be my vessel. So, one thing, just to get it out of the way, this is very conversational. If you want to put me in your second monitor, just go ahead, because that's like what this will be. But I was thinking about like the three archetypal like D&D spellcasters, not counting druids. I mean, I guess you could count them if you wanted, but I had always found the first time I had ever kind of gotten into D&D, which for me was in the form of Baldur's Gate 3, which I know is not strictly speaking like all encompassing, but it's certainly like based off of the 5e D&D, and it, it's based in that world, right? So like when I would customize my character, one thing that stuck out to me immediately was like the difference between the spellcasters, like what that all meant. The druid was obvious, because I've seen druids in other games, like I played World of Warcraft. I don't know why it took me so long to get into Dungeons and Dragons, but like I've always wanted to, and Baldur's Gate 3 was sort of what helped me take that step. So it's like, yeah, druids, cool, I understand. Basically nature mages, right? They get their power from nature. They can shapeshift into animals or any kind of like natural creature, right? That all makes sense. But then when I would look through, it's like, yeah, it all makes sense. Fighter, straightforward, ranger, rogue, paladin, cleric. These all make sense to me. But then the three like archetypal mages, that being the wizard, the sorcerer, the warlock, I was like, what the fuck is the difference between any of that? I thought that when I played Baldur's Gate 3 back in the day being a couple of years ago. And I always thought that was weird because I thought those terms were interchangeable. And maybe they are. Maybe in a lot of fantasy, warlock, wizard, sorcerer, mage, spellcaster, whatever, are just interchangeable terms. I mean, I certainly had always kind of treated them that way in any of my writings, or like in a lot of things like, say, Dragon Age, you are just a mage. They don't differentiate into certain subsects, or if they did, it would be based on magical type, like you could be a mage that's like a pyromancer or a hydromancer or a practitioner of dark magic or something, but you were still a mage. And I think even by the rules of at least Baldur's Gate 3, they still do consider these subgenres of the umbrella term that is mage. Because if you look at the description of the blade singing wizard in Baldur's Gate 3 after the patch 8 update, it says that like you combine the elegant maneuvers of a warrior with the devastating magics of a mage, implying that wizard is a subgenre of mage. But that would also mean that sorcerer and warlock are too. And maybe I'm onto nothing. Maybe all of you are just like, Cordell, there's actually like super like rigorously defined. Webster's dictionary defines warlock and mage as like, well, fucking, you know what? I'm coming across this now. Okay. It's something I thought about for a while. I had to stop before. Okay. This isn't just coming out of nowhere. I'm just voicing it now. Okay. All right. If you're smarter than me, you can just be fucking smarter than me. Okay. But I'm just talking about it. All right. But which one's the best? Obviously there's a gameplay answer to that, But is there a lore answer to that? Is there an upper threshold to how much of a Giga Chad you can be by being either like a sorcerer, a warlock, or a wizard? Like, what would it matter in lore? What would that look like if the three epitome mages of these particular types of magecraft got together and debated or they battled or what have you? Like, what would that mean? So to keep it clean, I want to go through the different types of mages as it pertains to at least current 5e D&D, right? Because that's like a nice clean cut structure through which to look at this. Because obviously if we would just went through anything, like, I write, I swear, and I have certain types of magics that exist in my worlds, and not necessarily every practitioner of every kind of magic is considered a mage. It kind of just depends. So like we're gonna use this as a standard because I feel like Dungeons and Dragons is a great standard by which to judge fantasy on a kind of general level, and this is what that was the IP in Baldur's Gate 3 specifically that sort of begged this question within myself. So I think that's a good lens through which to operate, right? So I guess we can just go in alphabetical order. Let's look at the Sorcerer. Now, as far as D&D's understanding of a sorcerer is someone who is born with innate magical properties, right? They didn't have to learn it, and they didn't get granted it by some kind of eldritch being. It was just something that they were born with. Now, there's a caveat that comes with that. A lot of the times, this magic that they're born with is volatile and not easy to control. So a lot of their life is spent trying to control this innate magic before it presumably does something bad. Whether it comes out in a burst like wild magic, or if it's like maybe, I don't know, maybe you're just so fucking powerful and you've got all this latent magic within you that is just overflowing and you are not strong enough to contain it as a mere mortal, and it could like explode at random times and destroy property or like hurt the people closest to you. So it's like, from the ability perspective, it's like, well, yeah, you'd be like a gifted person. You'd be like a savant. Like you'd be someone who's a prodigy. I feel like would be the real world equivalent, right? Someone who's just naturally good at something. And obviously, you see where the conflict, I guess, with wizards would come in, where a wizard probably feels like, I had to fucking earn this, and you're born with it, like, fuck you, But I think that's cool because on that level, we can already kind of stop the argument. So it's like, well, the sorcerer is then the best, right? Because they didn't have to do anything. They just had this magic. They're just that cracked that they were born with it. But it's obviously not that simple. Because at least in terms of gameplay function, when I play D&D with my friends, like actual tabletop D&D, you get access to less spells technically if you're a sorcerer, in that you don't start with as many. It's not like you have a wide learned magical vocabulary. You're just a dude who was born with magic. It'd be the same way where if you were naturally born very big and muscular, you maybe don't appreciate the strength as much as someone who was born very scrawny and weak and had to work for all of his strength. You know what I mean? And so maybe the sorcerer is kind of like that. And so I could see them being powerful canonically because by nature of what they were born more powerful than the next guy. But like, what's the upper limit of that? Is the magic that they're born with sort of like a hard limit, like a genetic muscle limit? Is it like that? Or are they born with a limit that they can then expand through constant practice? Could a sorcerer in lore become a wizard? Could a sorcerer learn the ways of the wizard and become the ultimate life form by being born magically powerful, but then growing that power through constant study and perfection and devoting yourself to like arcane study? Like, could it happen like that? So it's like, if you think of it that way, then yeah. But then, we go back to the drawbacks, because that's what I want to do. I want to talk about the positives and the drawbacks of all of them. So it's like, the drawbacks of this would be that if you were born with a particularly volatile magic, because I'm not sure, can you be born with like 1 out of 10 magic, but then also be born with 10 out of 10 magic? Like, are there levels to the amount of sorcerer you can be when you're born? Maybe all these questions are answered in deeper D&D reading material, and I just haven't gotten to them yet. But that is a question that I think about. Because what if like you just have like little itty bitty power that you're born with, but you were born with it, so technically you are a sorcerer. So it's like you got like one little dragon scale on your forehead, and you're like, and like a little fart of fire comes out, and it's like, hey, technically I'm a sorcerer, bro. I did that naturally. I didn't need to learn how to do that. Yeah, see, maybe one day I do got to edit just to cut shit like that out. Got me stammering on the mic. But I think that's cool that there's that sort of juxtaposition. But moving on to like a warlock. A warlock is interesting because a warlock gets their power from a patron, whether that patron's a devil, an eldritch god, a high fae lord. That's where they're getting their power from. And I can think of some very, very stark benefits that come with that. One thing in particular is that it's all patron based, right? You're getting a magical sugar daddy. So it's like, if your patron is already extraordinarily powerful, you're kind of good, right? Like, one thing that comes to mind in particular is the subclass uh, the Great Old One Warlock from Baldur's Gate 3. Because you make your pact with an unspeakably like ancient eldritch god. Like it could be Cthulhu or some shit, you know? And if this incomprehensible eldritch being is more powerful than anything you can conceive of on, say, Faerun, like, what's the upper limit of that? You know, like, because if this patron is inherently unknowable, then, like, there's theoretically no limit to how powerful you can be. And I think that if we're talking just theory, a warlock would have to be the most powerful one at its absolute upper limit. Now, your patron could also be a devil, like Will in Baldur's Gate. So, like, obviously, your patron being a devil should technically have nothing on a god. So, like, if you were the chosen of a god like Gale, it stands to reason that your magical abilities would be a little bit more powerful as opposed to a devil, you would think, right? Because, like, in the cosmic hierarchy, a god would outrank a devil. But an eldritch god that is unknowable and exists outside of the pantheon that we've come to understand could be anywhere on that scale because there's kind of no inherent rules. Just from a lore perspective, you know? Like, obviously, there can be D&D preset adventures or, like, canon lore that sort of supersede that, but also, by nature of D&D, homebrew is sort of built into the ethos of it, and even the game of D&D acknowledges that whatever you do in D&D is technically canon, because it all adds to the ever-growing multiverse that is D&D. I actually kind of like that. That's a very, like, cool world-building tactic to justify everyone's little homebrew campaigns. Like, it's all part of the greater whole. So it's like you could easily just say that your warlock got their power from an unspeakably powerful entity that is beyond even the understanding of the gods we've come to know. And, you know, by proxy, your warlock, who siphons even maybe a fraction of their power, maybe not even a lot, maybe that's all it would take, could theoretically be the most powerful spellcaster that ever lived because of where they're getting it from. But then that could also be shitty. You know, like if your patron is just like some creature from the Shadowfell, you know, it's like, what the fuck would that mean against like the power of a god? You know, how much upper limit power could they possibly give you? And that's why I feel like on the lower end, like warlock would be the one of extremes, right? Like I guess you could argue that about sorcerer as well, but I feel like warlock would be one of extremes because you could have a really shitty poopy patron, but you could have an inconceivably fantastic patron, you know? And maybe just a benevolent one. Maybe just an eldritch being that is just so disinterested. Or maybe he just wants a laugh. He's like, okay, here, have like so much fucking power. You know what I mean? Like, and he asks for nothing in return, you know? Or he could ask for everything. You know what I mean? Like, you don't really know what you're getting, especially when you take homebrew into the mix, where it's like, I feel like in lore, obviously gameplay balances itself out however it can, but it's like in lore, that could be like the most powerful. But it could also be the most maybe like useless, you know? I mean, because what are the odds that if you're a sorcerer, you actually are born with that little shitty dick magic, you know? Like, does that ever happen? Again, I guess if you're homebrewing, it could happen, and maybe that could be funny, and maybe that could make for a funny D&D adventure with your friends where it's like you're a sorcerer born with magic, but the magical limit you were born with is like really tiny. I don't know. Maybe there's something there. But then we've got the wizard. And I feel like the wizard is the reliable. That's all reliable right there. You weren't necessarily born with magic, but through constant study and effort, you gained your arcane prowess, which you could say on the character level matters more because it proves that they worked for something. They earned it. And so, like, much in the same way, it's like if you're working out and you earn all of your muscle after a bulk, it stays with you for a while even when you cut. You know, you maintain some of that size and strength when you cut down. Whereas, like, if you're abusing performance enhancing drugs and you get to some inhuman size, the second you stop those drugs, you lose a lot of muscle really quickly, you know? So it's like it doesn't have as much staying power. But it's like, you know, if you're a fucking warlock and everything that was great about you came from an eldritch being, the second they cut off the fount, you're just a normal guy. And what combat prowess do you really offer? Unless you thought of that ahead of time and started training with the blade or something. But, like, if you're a wizard, that's all you. Yeah, I mean, at least in the context of Baldur's Gate 3, you're drawing your power from the weave, which is, like, a limit of power set by a god that you can't really cross. But still, like, insofar as your ability to traverse the powers of the weave, that's all you, right? That's all your own skill. And that has inherent, I think, character value. And I think that's why a lot of people really like wizards. That and the fact that because they've actually studied to gain this, you get a wider array of spells, just because you're more knowledgeable, and that's like the edge, you know. Like sorcerers are more just like charismatic, and like they have the innate magic that they didn't work for, and then the wizard is like the intellect. It's all intelligence, and they worked for every piece of this magical prowess that they earned, right? So it's like that could be really cool, especially lore wise, because it helps with, I think, character. It just makes the character more compelling, I guess. If he had to earn all of his magic, it would be like, at least in a general sense, a little bit more of a compelling watch to see someone become a wizard than just be born a sorcerer, right? And I guess if you just really are that guy, the upper limit's pretty fucking high, because I think that it's well agreed upon in the community of Baldur's Gate 3 that without the tadpole and excluding Tav, because you can just make up Tav's whole backstory, Gale would be the most powerful of all of your companions, because not only is he a master like arch mage wizard, but he's the chosen of Mystra, so he's chosen by a goddess. So it's like that already gives him like an insane edge, because I think probably Will is a second, but his patron's a devil who in lore has given him extremely absurd power. But I mean, what is that compared to being Mistress chosen? Like, does it compare? You know, like these theoretical questions that the game will never let us prove, you know, like that's interesting to me. But then you've got the lower end of the wizard, which is just, you know, I guess if you're just not that good at studying, like it has the potential to be the most human, you know, because like if I'm just sitting there reading an old dusty tome and I just, for the fucking life of me, like ADHD brain, I just can't fucking like understand the spells, man. Like it's not clicking. Maybe I don't find it that interesting, although I definitely would, but maybe like maybe you don't find it that interesting, so it's really hard to learn. Or like maybe you have the will, but you just don't have the mental fortitude to memorize all these spells, to think about these incantations, and so it doesn't really go anywhere, you know. So it's like you have the potential to just be a bigger failure, because if you're born with magic, you already can't fail. You did it. You're there. You're a sorcerer. You got the magic. Whereas like with a warlock, it's like, hey, cosmic sugar daddy, give me some spells. And you just be like, okay, mortal kitten, you know, and give you your spells. Whereas a wizard, it's like, if you fail, that's on you, bro. Like there's nothing that can be done. You either get it by your own effort or you fucking fail because of your own faults. So not really sure what I expected any of y'all to really glean from my ramblings, but I do find that interesting, and it makes me think, like, what would I rather be in this world? So let's not do any cop-outs. Let's definitively answer, like, hey, Cordell, what would you rather be in this context? Would you rather be a sorcerer, a warlock, or a wizard? I think what I would do, or what I would like to be, I would like to be a sorcerer, I think. I think that not only just because charisma is my favorite stat in the game, I always love doing like the party face. Dialogue's my favorite part of any of these games. Even in tabletop D&D, I love the talking. That's the bit I love the most. So it's like I'd probably just go based on that. But even for like a more lore reason, I would like the idea that I'm born with magic. So like that initial barrier to entry I don't really have to deal with, especially if it gives me like cool dragon scales. That'd be sick. But like I like the idea of being a wizard. Fuck. Look, I'm already fucking it up. I like the idea of being a sorcerer who then attends wizard academies, right? Like being a sorcerer, but trying to respect the way of the wizard, learn from my elders, and like try to harness the magics that are burning deep inside me from the knowledge I gain from more prominent wizards, more prominent spellcasters. So I can sort of combine the best of both worlds. Now, if I then go as a sorcerer who learned from wizards and made a deal with an eldritch god who was nice, that could be fucking game over. But, you know, obviously when it comes to warlocks, what is narratively more interesting is when these pacts come with costs, and I wouldn't want to deal with that if that were actually true. It's cool for a story, but in real life, I don't want to have to deal with a cost with some patron, because it could be fucked. I could sell my soul to a devil, or like an eldritch being could take like my firstborn child from me or something, and I'm like, I don't want that. So it's like, if I had to pick one, give me sorcerer, so that I already start from a at least semi-powerful level, and I can just kind of try to refine it from there. But okay, yeah, those are really all my thoughts on it. Again, I'm gonna try to upload more. Never mind just how fucking messy my room is. It's not filthy, it's just disorganized, okay? So at least know that. But like, yeah, I definitely want to try uploading more. Hopefully, if I go with this more free form kind of thing, maybe it'll allow y'all to connect with me more on a human level, and I'll just seem less edited, put together. You know what I mean? Like, it's just more raw, more real. But then also, I just hate editing. I just hate it so much. So like maybe this will help me upload more so that I can, once I get the ball rolling, I can actually have like more of the focus to sit down and properly edit something later when I know that I'm like committed. So yeah, thanks for watching, y'all. Peace out.